Okay, so it looks like we're online and recording. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a restful Easter holiday, and um, again, we should be um, opening some classes up for fall. I was talking before everybody was on. Uh, Looks like summertime is online, unless it's one of those courses that just has to be face to face, and they'll kind of phase students in. But fall looks like we're going to be, if we stay in the same direction that we're going, we'll be having some classes back in the classroom. So if you're around, you can look forward to that. If you're graduating, you can look forward to that. But as far as our assignments go, I hope it wasn't too confusing. So just to kind of let you know, we're going to throw 9 and 10 together this week because they're very short. So for the quiz that I create, that little quiz that I typically do, that's not in the Revel assignments, it's going to encompass 9 and 10. But it's only like 10 questions or so. And then your Revel assignments, the quiz part will just cover chapter 10. So hopefully everything I kind of put in there makes sense. And then your writing assignment for this week, just to take a quick look at it, it's going to be kind of an easy one just to ease you back in, because you're probably not, unless you did some work on your vacation, which some of you may have. So it's kind of an easy scenario where really all we're looking for is a supplemental report and a traffic ticket or a citation. So basically the premise is it's a possible burglary in progress, and somebody calls to report somebody breaking into a car, and as the investigation kind of unfolds, you are able to figure out that it's the owner of the car who basically locked his keys in the car. And as part of the investigation, though, the officers observe what appears to be marijuana in plain sight inside the vehicle. And an interesting twist now, because marijuana to a certain level now is legal, right, in California. So it's only illegal in a couple of different circumstances. Under the influence while driving could be one. Over an ounce would be another one, or a certain amount of concentrated cannabis could be a violation as well, or too many plants, etc., without going into detail. But there is a section in the vehicle code, which is what you're going to write your ticket on. And it's 23-222 subsection little b, that talks about possessing marijuana in a vehicle. And it's part of the interesting concept of this is that this section typically applies to when somebody is driving, but it also applies to having it in a car not packaged properly as well. So there's like a little kind of an interesting tweak. So I would suggest that you read the section, and I kind of have it listed here. And if you go down here, I even put the link to the vehicle code section where you could actually read the whole thing. But that's what I want you to write the citation for. So it's a supplemental and a citation. You don't have to do the crime report, the report forms with the boxes. This is more to add the probable cause. So really, if you look down here, your assignment is write the supplemental report outlining the incident, which means that you have to outline the whole incident, just like a narrative, because you're going to have to write down or specify your probable cause. So, because the person, he was the owner of the vehicle. So watch the video, kind of, think about your probable cause to search the vehicle and to recover the marijuana that was in the car, and then to issue the citation. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. And then I tell you again here, you just need the supplemental, which is the narrative part, and the ticket. And the citation is one that you can type into. If you don't want to do that and you want to print it and write on it and then upload it, you can do that too. So a couple of you like to do that as well. So that's fine. And the citation looks like this. So again, you can type into the boxes, or you can just handwrite it in, however. So that's kind of what your writing assignment is for this week. Pay special attention, though, to your probable cause. Because, again, if you had to go to court, you're going to have to explain yourself. And I even threw in a little link to the Fourth Amendment if you're interested in reading a little bit more. It basically gives you all the nuts and bolts to the Fourth Amendment. So as far as search and seizure. So any questions on the assignment as far as the writing assignment goes? Just to kind of get you back in the flow, and then what it's like to fill out a traffic ticket as well. Because basically this section is an infraction, which is a citation.
I think it's just okay.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
All right. So with that said then, and if you think of any other questions, you can always pop back in. Let's go ahead and talk about and go over chapter 9, and then we'll do chapter 10. And they're fairly short chapters, so I won't keep you that long. And typically I don't keep you that long because I want to give you more time to research and do your work, etc. But we're going to be chapter 9 talks about misdemeanor crimes involving people and property. And they're somewhat similar to a regular police report, depending upon which jurisdiction you're working for. And so what I want to do is I'm going to show you a couple of different misdemeanor crimes against both people and property that you're probably going to come up against. So as you go throughout your career, there's going to be certain misdemeanor offenses that you're going to run into often. And then there are going to be some that you're not going to run into that often. So we're going to kind of take a look at those. Keep in mind also that each state is different when it comes to how crimes are defined. So you're going to have to really ensure that you document your crime in accordance with the statute. So you're going to have to know the elements. So again, and we're kind of bringing this up. I know we've talked about this before, but it applies both in misdemeanors and felonies to understand what the elements of the crimes are, because that's how you're going to get a conviction. If you can't fill the elements in and you can't put that in your report, then you're going to be missing something there. So, again, a lot of these crimes are commonplace, but they do need to be documented if you're going to get some prosecution. So don't spend less time on a misdemeanor report because it's still going to require, documentation properly. And misdemeanor crimes can be nonviolent or they can be violent crimes. And they can be a little bit scary for people as well. So, a couple examples: graffiti is a misdemeanor, typically, unless the dollar amount reaches a certain level. And that's, kind of against property. Or assault, somebody getting punched in the face. So there's kind of, there's a nonviolent and violent ones. So just remember, they're not always, we don't want to just kind of gloss over them and, hey, it's only a misdemeanor, it's not that big a deal. Because a lot of misdemeanor cases actually get filed. A lot of DUI cases get filed, and those are typically misdemeanors as well. So just, understand that. A couple of examples just to show you: somebody pointing a handgun up in the air. Typically, it's going to be brandishing, and if he's not pointing it at anybody, it's probably just going to be a misdemeanor. And you're probably asking yourself, well, why is that? Well, again, you're going to have to establish the elements. Now, if he turns and points that at somebody, it could be a felony, but typically brandishing a firearm is a misdemeanor. So, but you're still going to have to document that, right? Make sure you have all the elements of the crime. Pulling somebody over in a car and seeing a gun on their front seat. It happens. You'd be surprised, or you will be surprised. When the things that you actually see or the things that you encounter. And having a loaded firearm in a vehicle, unless you have a kind of a bad criminal history, or you're on probation or on parole or something like that, is typically a misdemeanor. So, and it can be, again, you're still going to have to establish the elements of the crime. So, just kind of keep all this in mind. And we're not going to go through every single one of these, but these are some typical misdemeanor cases that you're going to run into. You're going to run into these, what we call minor assaults. Assault and battery. You've probably heard that before. And what's interesting between those two, and if you've taken a criminal law class, you probably know this. I'm going to see if this link works for me. Okay, so I've kind of put these hyperlinks in there to where if you want to know what assault is, you can read what it says. Now we're looking at California. This is a misdemeanor, so it talks about an assault is an unlawful attempt coupled with the presentability, meaning that you're in the right place at the right time and you're able to carry out the crime to commit violent injury on the person of another. But what's kind of interesting is nowhere in there does it say striking. So again, the elements of assault is you don't actually have to hit somebody to make it an assault. You could swing and miss, and that could be an assault. So where the battery or the hitting part comes in, if you were to go back here and you go to the next section I have here, which is 242, the battery part is any willful and unlawful use of force or violence. So you've kind of got two sections that make up assault and battery, if you will. So, but you have to understand the elements, which is kind of the important thing that I'm driving at here. All right, let me get back to the wrong one. Where am I at? Here we go. Okay. Trespassing could be another one. And there's a lot of sections that fall under the section of 602, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on there. I'll just click there really quick so you can see it. But 602 is typically a trespassing section, but it also it depends which subsection. So, and some sections are weird. Like, here, 602A, cutting down, destroying, or injuring any kind of wood or timber. So it's like illegally cutting down trees. You're probably not going to run across that unless you're a park ranger or something like, it just doesn't fit with maybe an urban, law enforcement officer. But you can see all the subsections for 602. And they kind of go way, way down. So there's a lot of them that fall under this trespass section. But these are things that you're going to run into. Annoying phone call reports or harassment reports or stalking reports. We tend to get quite a few of those where, people call people and make threats or leave threatening messages, or somebody's in violation of a restraining order and they're following a person. These are some, types of reports you're going to run across. Other ones are going to be drug possession. What used to be felonies for several different types of controlled substances, after I think it was last year or the year before, it was changed where some sections are now misdemeanors unless there's a certain amount. So simple possession can be a misdemeanor now, but you're going to run into a lot of drug possession cases, or even the next one here, which is health and safety, under the influence of a substance. Not drunk driving, that'd be down here. But again, these are all sections that you're gonna run across, typically misdemeanors. Minor thefts, so thefts from like a commercial store, like shoplifting. That's what 490.5 is. So a lot of these different things. But remember, even if I go and just kind of look at this, as we write these reports, there's a lot of stuff in here. So you have to make sure that you can prove all of the elements that are necessary. So this is the possession of a controlled substance. And then there's a lot of different subsections that talk about the fines and different things like that. So that's why it's just important that you know and understand that just because it's a misdemeanor doesn't mean that you just kind of put less effort in, I guess is a better way of saying it. A lot of misdemeanor crimes for property, usually affiliated with a financial loss to the victim. A lot of states differentiate between misdemeanors and felonies by the amount of the damage or the financial loss, to where it's a misdemeanor or a felony. So that kind of leads us into the question here. When we're talking about property, it's important that you verify the cost, or just ask the person. And you can probably tell whether they're inflating it or what have you. But you know, in California, there's going to be a dollar amount there for the loss. Keep in mind, misdemeanors are also there's crimes that are typically punished by less than a year in the county jail, by a fine, by restitution, which means that you pay restitution for, let's say, if you graffitied somebody's wall, the restitution could be financial, a fine, or it could be you cleaning off the wall. That's still part of restitution. Or it could be all of them. It depends what the judge ends up determining. So it's less than a year in the county jail typically for misdemeanors. And then remember, I talked about the difference between felony and misdemeanor, and even California. Here's an example. So we have the standard theft section, just as an example. It's called penal. It's 484, petty theft, wrongful taking, stealing someone else's property. When the value is less than $950, that makes it a misdemeanor. But if it's more than $950, it makes it grand theft, not petty theft, and now it's a felony. So you can see how, when there's a simple theft, you do need to ask somebody what's the value of what was stolen, because that's going to be important. But then some sections, without trying to make it too confusing, some items just based on the item make it a felony. So theft of certain types of property, like a firearm, it's automatically a felony. It's not a misdemeanor. It doesn't matter whether the gun's worth $15. It's still a firearm. So if it's a functioning firearm, that changes the misdemeanor to a felony. So regardless of the value. So again, just, kind of giving you a lot of facts, and you're not going to have to remember all this stuff, but these are typically things that you're going to run into. Grand theft, we talked about that. That's the higher level of theft, $950 or more. But in California, it can be a wobbler, which means depending upon what the DA wants to do, it can be filed as either one, a misdemeanor or a felony. So just to kind of throw another curveball at you. So again, don't panic if it doesn't kind of make sense. Some examples of different types of property crimes. So we talked about theft. We talked about some states basically consider vandalism criminal mischief as kind of a play on words. Let me see. I think I have somebody. Okay. So it does depend on what state you're in, whether or not it's going to be called vandalism or criminal mischief, or damage to private property. So there's some different types for you to kind of consider. Again, when the situation allows, ask the victim if he or she has documentation. If they don't, that's okay. But if they have a receipt for the item, that'd be great, because then you could take a photo of it or make a photocopy of it, and you could include that in your report. So if they have a sales receipt, that's great. If they don't, you have to consider the source. And then just kind of to throw this in there, consider the value when somebody's, and the situation. If somebody says, I was walking down the alleyway in this drug-infested neighborhood, and I had $10,000 in cash, and I got jumped and they robbed me for my money, and I want to make a report, you should think about that, because there's something not right with that. So whether the person might be lying about, what he was doing in the alleyway with all that money, did he really have all that money? So there's a lot of other things that you have to just kind of consider as you document these things. Again, original paperwork is important on certain things. Serial numbers are really important on a lot of things, whether they're bikes, firearms, things that you can document and put that serial number into a system. So most police departments have a local system where they can put serial numbers in. And then we have a kind of a California-wide stolen property system. And you could actually put, serial numbers in there. That way, if some other officer finds the property and runs the serial number, it's going to come back stolen. So they'll be able to, seize that property and recover it. So, Serial numbers are really good. And a lot of people, though, don't. Think of it right now. And I'll just and you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but how many of you have serial numbers for a lot of the items or expensive items in your home? Like your, yeah, I mean, and a lot of people don't. So if you get burglarized and they start asking for serial numbers, or have any of you actually walked through your house, apartment, wherever you live, and at least taken photographs of your property?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, so that way you can actually show if things were stolen, you have some documentation to show your insurance company, law enforcement that, hey, I did have a big screen. Here's a picture of it. I mean, so these are important things just for you in general to do. But if you have serial numbers on certain items, it's really important that you document that. And it's just as important that you get that from any type of victim as well. And finally, there's the typically for property forms, we've been using that kind of crime incident report. The last page on that crime incident report, I believe, looks like this. And this is where you're going to document the property that was stolen. The item number, meaning like, item 1, 2, 3, how many of whatever were stolen, the brand, the model, the description, the serial number, and the damage, if it's damage instead. And it's important to, you know, get the description down, because maybe they don't have a serial number, but maybe the item is unique or different. And they might be able to identify it later because it is very unique, or in its color or whatever it is. So also property forms, we're talking about the value, any photos, great. And you've seen these report forms before. This is the standard incident report that we've been using, that's got the face page, and then the last couple of pages we have property here, and then we have additional property down here. So you don't have to put it in two places, but just make sure that you're documenting whatever is being stolen. And then here's just kind of another one. This is Riverside Sheriff's. This was Rialto, this is San Bernardino County, and this is Riverside County. Similar thing, they have an incident report face page and they have a property report. So most agencies have something similar to this. So when you write your your report, even though it's a misdemeanor, same thing. Tell the story of the incident, chronological order, simple, understandable words, but be detailed. And remember when writing the report that all the information and evidence collection is crucial, because you're still possibly looking at recovering that property later on, or maybe finding a suspect. So again, just because it's a misdemeanor, don't kiss it off and kind of downplay it. Make sure you know the statutes, so you know the elements, just like in any other felony crime. And we've already kind of talked about the elements of things like that. So some tips as we finish up this particular chapter. When it comes to people and property reports, a lot of times, it's often defined as an attempt to injure someone else. In circumstances, it can be threats. It can actually be striking. One common definition would be kind of an intentional attempt. And a lot of these misdemeanors are fairly straightforward. But just remember, again, look at the elements in there. Assault is one of the big ones. And I'm not going to kind of keep talking about that too much more because we've spent a lot of time on that. But, basic fighting or assault, you're going to run into that a lot throughout your career. We kind of touched on assault and battery. So I'm not going to spend the chapter kind of rehashes it a few times. Again, just know the elements, the difference between assault and battery and how they kind of play together. And I've got some definitions that kind of cover that as well. When you're taking an assault report, though, just if it's a crime against a person, remember you're going to want to take photos. If it's a crime against property, you're going to want serial numbers, receipts, characteristics, different things. with people. Again, document, take photos, follow up with your victim, your assault victims, the next day or so, or even a couple of days. Does anybody know why you'd want to follow up with somebody that's been punched or hit with something or slapped or anything?
The bruises might.
Yeah, so I heard a couple of you say it. Yeah, things are going to start to, if there's a bruise that's going to show, it might just be some redness when you take a picture on scene at the time of the incident or, directly following, but a couple of days later, it might be a big bruise. So you're going to want to go back and do that. And then you're also going to want to document when you go back if any medical attention was required. And then you're going to want to document that as well. So, a lot of these assault reports, you're just going to have to follow up just for photos. And then if you have any other questions, you can always ask them at the end. Okay, so that was a fairly quick chapter. Again, it covers basically misdemeanors. And when we talk about felonies, and then I'll have some time for questions, of course, because we're kind of running pretty good. The actual forms aren't going to be that much different. It's just going to be a different type of crime. And felonies are typically punished by, obviously the punishment's going to be higher. So it's going to be, more than a year and could be in state prison. So just like we did with misdemeanors, we're going to talk a little bit about felonies. And when we talk about a felony crime against property is usually an offense that's associated, again, with financial loss. You're going to have to make sure you have the elements just like you did with misdemeanors. And typically, if it's if it's a felony property crime, there's going to be a dollar amount or the crime itself is going to tell you that it's a felony. So a couple of typical ones would be, this should be 487, not 478. And I will fix that there. So when remember we talked about petty theft and grand theft. So if you look at the felony section, it says grand theft is committed in any of the following. So when it talks about personal property is the value exceeding $950. And of course, there's always some exceptions. Okay. One thing that's interesting, and I'm not going to get into this, remember I told you it depends on the item. It's a felony. And look, this is like avocados, olives, deciduous fruits, vegetables. So certain items, and if it's over $250, it could be a felony. So they're talking about crops and things like that. So it's a felony when anybody takes a firearm, as I talked about before, or a vehicle. So sometimes the item itself, as we said, makes it a felony. Sometimes it's the dollar amount. 594 vandalism, which would be, graffiti. It depends on the dollar amount, or it could depend on what was graffitied. Anybody have an idea on a location that if somebody graffitied a certain type of location, like building, business, etc., a church, very good. So yeah, so that would make it a felony. So some of these things might actually be felonies depending upon, where. We talked about motor vehicle theft, and I'm not going to go through and click on all these, but these links will show you the elements. But stealing a car, burglary of a residence or an apartment, or, when you look at burglary, there's a lot of elements. And this is probably one that might be worth looking at. To prove this, you have to be able to show that, every person who entered any, let's just say house, but look at all the other places: room, apartment, tenement, shop, warehouse, store, mill, barn, stable, tent. That's interesting, right? But then you kind of go down in here further. With intent to commit grand or petty theft or any other felony is guilty of burglary. So you have to show that, which means you have to show their intent to go in. So when we go back to one of our other writing scenarios, remember the burglary at the bar? we showed the person's intent because he moved objects that were somewhere else by the window or by the door. I can't remember. Maybe it was by the door. Um, Stacked them up. So it was his intent to probably take them. So that's how you were able to prove that. So that's why, again, it's important that we understand. But these are reports that you're going to take all the time. Grand theft reports, vandalism reports. You'll just have to know the difference between the misdemeanor, felony. Vehicle thefts. A lot of vehicle thefts in California. Burglaries are kind of on the rise again. So a lot of those. We talked about, someone said it, vandalism to church property. It doesn't matter if it's, here you have some kind of satanic type stuff, or if it's, some bozo that just wrote this here, it's still going to be a felony because of the section, because of the place. So that's why, again, you kind of need to know the elements. But it's the same reporting that you've been doing all along. It's just, again, it's going to be the location, the type of object, or the monetary value. We talked about guns. You steal a gun, it's a felony automatically. It doesn't matter what the value is. We use the same reports. You've already done some felony reports, so you've already seen these report forms, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But you've all used these forms before, so you should be pretty familiar by now. Keep in mind that whatever state you're in, the state statute is going to describe in detail the thresholds of the property. So like in grand theft versus petty theft, remember we read the grand theft section, in excess of $950. So if it's $950, is it a misdemeanor or a felony? Misdemeanor, because it said in excess, meaning more. So you have to kind of look at that. And then we know the penalty for felony crimes, typically more than 1 year in state prison, sometimes county jail because of overcrowding, a fine, restitution, or any combination of all three of those. So, and that's why it's important that we document stuff. Important. So again, we've already talked about the dollar amount. We don't have to kind of beat that up again. Same thing on some felony crimes. Make sure that you're looking for serial numbers, especially with firearms. There's a lot of expensive bicycles that are out there, or scooters and things like that. So you're going to want to get those serial numbers if you can, or any identifying marks. Maybe it's something that was taken and they don't have a serial number, but there was this big scratch or something on it to where somebody can identify it later. And if they have any photos of the missing items, those are really good too, because a lot of times we can make photocopies or copies of their pictures, and we can send those out to patrol officers. And if they recover this property, they don't need a serial number. They can just look at the picture. So, when you talk about something expensive, maybe like this being stolen, it's fairly unique. There's not a lot of those out there. So you have a good chance of recovery if there's a picture of it, or you can describe it, have the person really describe it in detail. So that way, if it's found. Let's see, what else? We kind of covered that. And then kind of an interesting criminal law type thing. And there's a unique section, and I think I kind of wanted to finish up on this. There's a section called 496 of the California Penal Code, and it's called receiving or possession of stolen property. But one interesting fact about this section, you're going to run across this a lot where people have stolen property. They have to know that it's stolen, or should have known. So when you look at this section, hopefully it'll take me there. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff here. Okay. But it says, every person who buys or receives any property that's been stolen or that has been obtained in a manner through theft, extortion, etc. And then right here, knowing, okay, that the property was stolen, obtained, etc. So you have to knowingly, you have to be able to show somehow that they knew that this property was stolen. So let's go back to our slide, and I talk about this in my criminal law class. This is a picture of a Rolex, a fairly nice Rolex actually. And let's just say that you're cruising down the street and you happen to, you're in an area that's typically frequented by drug sellers and drug users. And you've arrested a few of these drug users before. Okay. And how do people typically support their habits? What's one way that somebody might support a habit?
Stealing and selling.
Yeah, stealing.
Property.
Yeah, so I mean, burglary, theft, robbery. I mean, these are some ways that somebody might be able to get items to be able, to sell at a pawn shop or different places. So you stop Johnny, the local drug user, and you've known that he's, been arrested for, stealing before, etc. And on his arm, he has this watch, this really nice, cool Rolex watch. And you ask him, hey, Johnny, where did you get this watch? And he says, I found it in the street. I was just walking along and I looked down and damn, there was that Rolex just laying right there. So I picked it up and I put it on. And there's no identifying marks on it, so I didn't know who to return it to, so I'm just going to keep it. Or I thought I would just keep it. How are you going to prove that Johnny's in possession of stolen property? Any ideas?
Look for any recent reports of stolen Rolex.
Possibly. Okay, so that's one. So that would be the easiest one, would be to, check with dispatch, or you could maybe detain, Johnny, and maybe you could start looking through your files to see if anybody was the victim of a burglary and a Rolex was stolen. You could actually even send out a teletype, or a BOLO as they call it, but a teletype to other agencies, seeing if anybody has been the victim of a robbery or a burglary where a Rolex, and you could even send a picture of that. So that would be one way. So that's good. Okay. So what might be another way to show that that he's in possession of stolen property, to make your case for this 496? We got the easy one out of the way. Does anybody know what the value of a Rolex watch is? About?
Aren't they like
10,000 and above.
Oh, very good. Okay, a couple of you are entrepreneurs. Okay, so right. So a typical Rolex watch is about 10,000, and then it kind of goes up depending upon how fancy you get. Okay, is it reasonable that there would be a $10,000 watch laying in the street?
No.
Probably not. Okay, so we can kind of look at that. Could you talk to Johnny, the drug user, and ask him how much he thinks this? Well, first of all, do you think Johnny, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but I'm just being real here. Do you think Johnny can afford a $10,000 Rolex? Probably not, based on his past history, the fact that he's a burglar, a robber, a thiever, etc., and all that stuff. So, as we start to go back to the section here, because we're going to try to make our case on 496, and the big part of it is, every person who buys or receives, has property that's been stolen or has been obtained in a manner through extortion, knowing that it's been stolen or obtained, or who conceals, sells, or withholds, or aids in concealing or selling, etc. So we could interview him just to kind of help you out and ask him what he thinks the value of a Rolex watch is. And if he says, well, that's easy, Officer Farrar, they're like $10,000. well, I mean, and anything else? Any other ideas?
Could you ask him to show proof of purchase?
Okay, so that could be another thing. So, he said he found it. So, but if he said he bought it, then you could say, hey, do you have a receipt? Nah, I don't. But here, I just found it.
Can you ask him where he found it? Or just show you where he found it?
Okay, you could. So you could do that, where you could say, hey, where'd you find it? Well, I found it over there. Well, take me, show me. So you could start to chip away at his story. Now, it may just be that you may not have enough to show that he actually knew that it was stolen, although the average person, right, would know that this watch, that this person probably, because of what his the fact that he steals to support his habit, etc., and lives on the street maybe, etc., probably doesn't have the money to buy it. So, it's a little bit of kind of stereotyping, but it's a little bit of not. It's kind of using your rationale to chip away at his excuses. At the very least, as an officer, what would you do in this case?
Make note of it.
Okay, so you could make a note of it. What else might you do, Alec?
Probably take it away.
Who said that?
Safe.
Yes.
Irene.
So you could reasonably, okay, you could take it from him as part of your investigation and book it as, property for safekeeping while you're waiting for maybe agencies or a report to be filed, etc. Now, if a certain amount of time goes by and nobody claims that, then guess who gets to come back and get the Rolex? Yeah, it would be him. But chances are somebody would report this stolen long before that. And Rolexes do have serial numbers on the back. So, but this is just one of those cases just to kind of let you know that you're going to run into these where people are going to have stuff. Sometimes it might be money. You're going to stop a car or you're going to stop someone on a bike and they're going to have $10,000 in their backpack. And they're going to say something like, well, it's for rent and I was going to buy a car cash. And in your little police mind, you're going to go, God, really? Probably not. But, you're going to run across these. So you have to, if you're going to establish a crime, you have to have all the facts. Sometimes you can get away with taking items as for safekeeping and booking them and trying to, take a couple of days to figure out if there's an actual crime. But if not, then you may not be able to file on it. Chances are, if you took this Rolex from him, he would never come to the station to recover it because he'd probably be worried that somebody reported it stolen and you would arrest him when he showed up again. But these are things that you're going to run across quite often. Okay, so I know those were fairly quick, and I don't want anybody to log off before I can get some pictures of who showed up tonight. But with that said, does anybody have any questions? These are things that you've already done. You've done some misdemeanor type reports. You've done a couple of felony reports. So it shouldn't be anything really new. But these are, part of these chapters really is to expose you to the fact that, hey, just because it's a misdemeanor doesn't mean that you document any less. You still have to do some work on these reports, especially when it comes to property crimes, in order to get these things solved or filed or what have you. Any questions before we're done?
No, sir.
All right. Well, this was a very quick night, so I hope you appreciate that. But that gives you more time. Yeah, a lot of you are shaking your heads. Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay, well, that's good. Gives you more time. Don't forget to, be working on your final report as we kind of go further through the semester. If you couldn't make the little discussion that we had on, how to write your final report, I did post a video in there, so you should be able to at least kind of watch that, but start thinking of, you know, content is really what we're looking for. We're more than halfway through the semester, basically. And right now, instead of just making things very super, one or two sentences, start thinking of, the investigative side, the probable cause side, and start adding more content to your reports. And I think you're all doing really well right now. So if you have a question in the interim, feel free to email me or what have you. But if nobody has any other questions, you are free to go. And have a good evening.
All right. Thank you, sir.